What we saw today from Justin Trudeau was a version of him unfettered by the need to be nice.
Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal, but Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do. Completely bogus, completely unjustified. What he wants is to see a total collapse of the Canadian economy, because that'll make it easier to annex us. And yeah, we're probably going to keep booing the American anthem.
He's responding to months of threats and the arrival of a day Canada hoped it could avoid. But U.S. tariffs against Canada are here.
On the tariffs, is there any room left for Canada and Mexico to make a deal before midnight? And should we expect those Chinese tariffs, the extra 10%, to take?
No room left for Mexico or for Canada. No, the tariffs, they're all set.
Effective today, a 10% tax on Canadian oil and 25% on all other goods imported to the United States. But behind the fiercest reaction we have heard from Canada yet,
we will not back down from a fight.
I will fight for your job. I will fight for your family.
I will fight like I've never fought before.
There is a plan designed to inflict enough damage to the U.S. economy to force Trump to reconsider his tariffs. I'll explain. Counter-tariffs were never the Canadian government's first choice here because they knew they would hurt Canadians too.
I won't sugarcoat it. This is going to be tough.
Unfortunately, when you're in a trade war, you have to try and do damage to the other side. That's the logic of deterrence. We shouldn't have to do this, but we are going to have to do it.
Right, because a Canadian tariff on an American product essentially just means every time a Canadian importer, say a grocery store, buys something from the US, they have to pay the Canadian government a 25% tax. That hurts US suppliers because their products get a lot more expensive and a lot less competitive. But it also hurts Canadians because Canada buys a lot of stuff from the US.
We import about $500 billion worth of goods and services from the US. That's about 25% of our economic activity is coming from the US.
Now, unlike the US tariffs, which apply to all Canadian goods, the Canadian government has decided to tariff only specific American products. Their plan will eventually target $155 billion worth of goods, but it's divided into two distinct phases.
Starting with tariffs on $30 billion worth of goods immediately, and tariffs on the remaining $125 billion of American products in 21 days' time.
Let's start with phase one. Here's the official list of all the American products that are going to be tariffed as of March 4th. You can find it on the Canadian government's website. Most of what you'll find on it are consumer goods, the kinds of things you might find at the store, and for which the government says there are substitutes. So with groceries, orange juice, some vegetables, peanut butter, yogurt, butter, chicken, coffee, wine, beer, spices, chocolate, pasta. So if you do buy these things and they're from the US, they may become more expensive. And at the grocery store specifically, that's where you might see price increases first.
There are some things that there is a stock buildup of, household appliances lying around the local Lowe's or Home Depot or Canadian Tire. So you might have more options in terms of stuff that's already in the country. But fruits and vegetables, for example, those are harder to stockpile. And so getting them from a different source takes a long time to get here. That's where you're going to see people start to pay right out of the gates in day one.
And while the US is the biggest supplier for a lot of these goods, it's not the only supplier, meaning the government hopes you will also be able to find replacements for at least some of these products. You can get Canadian butter, for example, or Canadian chicken. Lots of things you can buy Canadian.
Booze is a really good example of this. It's not like your wine is going to go up because we make plenty and we import plenty from countries that aren't in a trade war with us. What this will do is decrease demand for those specific American products.
But that's not the case for everything. There are some things our Canadian climate just can't produce.
There are, in some cases, no direct substitution. My wife enjoys orange juice, and I said, well, you're just going to have to wait a while. Because we're not going to pay that price. Go drink apple juice because apples are grown here.
And it's not just food. The initial list also includes other non-food products that may be harder to substitute if you're used to buying certain brands. Clothes, shoes, cosmetics, shampoo, furniture, carpets, appliances, sheets and duvets, jewelry.
It'll depend on the business, the product you're buying, alternatives abroad, whether or not companies have stockpiled, et cetera, et cetera.
But if we don't have those substitute options to us, then we're stuck. And it's probably going to be the Canadian consumer that bears the brunt of the tariff.
So that's phase one, which the government says represents about $30 billion worth of US products. You can expect phase two to come into effect at the end of March, and for that phase to be much broader. We don't yet have a detailed list for this second phase of counter-tariffs, but we do know some of what they're planning to add. Things like vehicles, trucks, buses, steel, aluminum, and aerospace products. Things that you're a lot less likely to find at your local store, but products that many Canadian businesses rely on.
Those involve much more integrated and sophisticated supply chain links.
They'll inflict more damage.
Ultimately, what the Prime Minister has said is he wanted to give business time to prepare for the impact.
And the impact on industry is real. Car manufacturing, for example, relies heavily on steel and aluminum products from the US. And because 25% is well above the profit margin on cars and car parts, analysts predict it won't take long for parts makers to stop shipping across the border, for factories to close, and for thousands of workers to lose their jobs.
There's just one illustration. Honda has a major plant in Ontario. They have 2 plants in Ohio. They have plants in Mexico. A car is not made in one of those places. The Honda Civic includes components and assembly from all of those plants.
We're saying that border crossing's a little bit more difficult now. And every time that gets a little bit more difficult, you run the risk that it starts to derail production. And that's where you can really see an immediate impact.
So far, that's mainly what we know about Canada's official plan to respond. But they've been clear, they're prepared to do more. And provinces are making their own moves too. Several provincial governments are telling liquor stores to pull American products off their shelves. Others say they're going to stop buying American altogether.
To date, our government has put a stop to the purchase of any new U.S. products.
All U.S.-based companies will be banned from taking part in government procurement. U.S.-based businesses will now lose out on tens of billions of dollars in revenues.
And Ontario's premier there, taking one step further, threatening to put a 25% tax on all of the electricity his province provides to New York, Michigan, and Minnesota. And if things escalate, he says they could cut it off entirely.
If he wants to destroy our economy and our families, I will shut down the electricity going down to the U.S. And I'm telling you, we will do it.
The goal of all of this is to try and hit Americans, and in some cases, particularly Republicans, where it hurts.
What they're trying to do is concentrate the impact of the Canadian tariffs on specific regions of the United States where they can get political leverage on the people that support Trump.
Kentucky bourbon, motorcycles from Wisconsin, Florida orange juice, high-profile items.
The hope is that American businesses will start complaining to their local lawmakers, given the risk of losing their Canadian market altogether. And those lawmakers would then put pressure on Trump to do something.
Well, I think the idea is that if you can hit leaders within the Republican Party and do damage to their particular constituents, then when the phone starts ringing off the hook in their office, they're going to call the president and say, can you please call this off? It's not good for us, and it's not delivering what you want anyway.
You're already seeing Chuck Grassley, a prominent senator out of Iowa, talking about an exemption for potash, because much of the potash comes from Saskatchewan to the farmers in Iowa.
Many individual Canadians are also responding in kind, boycotting American goods, canceling U.S. vacations.
We had a trip planned in July, so those are off with my daughter.
Actually, I just returned 2 items that I saw made in USA. I was halfway down the aisle. I thought, I'm going to check that just for the fun of it. And it was made in USA, so I took it back.
And at a political level, what the Prime Minister said today signals that the relationship between 2 of the world's closest allies has changed. A fundamental shift for which the Canadian government has no explanation.
The United States launched a trade war against Canada, their closest partner and ally, their closest friend. At the same time, they're talking about working positively with Russia appeasing Vladimir Putin, a lying, murderous dictator. Make that make sense.